You're listening to The Crypt, and joining me on the show today is Jason McLeod, author of Dark Siege, A Connecticut Family's Nightmare, which is the #1 bestseller in the occultism category on Amazon. So, Jason, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you, Rita.
Most people now, they develop their interest in the paranormal because something strange might have happened to them when they were younger, and, you know, they're seeking answers. So what was it that first aroused your interest in the topic?
Well, even as a very little boy, I always believed in my innate connection to God or Source, and that we were spiritual beings or energetic beings temporarily animating our physical bodies to experience a third-dimensional reality. I just knew that as a basic understanding when I was younger, and that really fueled my interest in wanting to go and explore stories about ghosts and hauntings and legends and myths, of course, which are all based on true circumstances by and large. Mm-hmm. And would spend a lot of time in the libraries in middle school and in high school studying these subjects. And when I found my first metaphysical bookstore, I felt like a kid in a candy store. I was just so thrilled to find so many interesting books about the subjects that people were writing about, that based on their own experiences. And but that's really where it all began, and I just was always seemingly on this quest to enhance my knowledge, but also when reading these books to I had just an understanding about what was real and what was not. Mm-hmm. And you know, just trusting my intuition and so forth, where I would just put one thing down and say, oh, well, that's not real, or that's real. But it's all based on our own perceptions and what we believe is reality or fantasy.
Then how did you first come to know the world-famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren?
Well, Connecticut is a very small state, and there were rumors floating around, of course, since the 60s about this really interesting couple who devoted their lives to studying the paranormal. And I actually was a senior in high school in Westport, Connecticut, at Staples High School, when I pulled a book off the shelf in the library, the school library, called The Demonologist by Gerard Brittle, and that was the most terrifying cases that Ed and Lorraine Warren had ever investigated, that made the Amityville horror case look like a playhouse. And I read that book from cover to cover in one sitting in my bedroom alone from the time I got home from school until early evening, and I was absolutely terrified, not for myself, but for the families that were experiencing these horrific things that would just blow the minds of normal people who have never even heard of these terrible subjects. And I actually was so frightened, I made a crucifix out of popsicle sticks and Scotch tape, and that's the God's honest truth. And I returned the book to the shelf, and I really had no interest in, exploring working with Ed and Lorraine Warren further until 6 months later, when I was in my friend's car in the summer. And my friend was a paramedic and a former Army combat medic. And we were listening to the radio in his car, and they talked. There was a story about Ed and Lorraine Warren, and the story about the haunting behind the Three Men and a Baby movie in the editing phase, when they found that spirit in the editing phase, hiding behind the curtain with the high-powered rifle. And I turned to Lou and I said, that would be so cool to work with them. Yeah. And he said, yeah, no kidding. And the very next day, he called me and said, you aren't going to believe who just called me. And I asked, who? And he said, it was Ed Warren. And I said, come on. Oh, my God. And it turned out that Ed was starting to have some heart issues because of all the horrific things that he was experiencing. So he called Bishop McKenna, who then in turn called the director of the emergency medical service in Norwalk, Connecticut, requesting a medic preferably with combat experience, and he recommended Lou that he would be just the man. So he gave Ed Lou's phone number, and he called Lou and invited him to their Monday night meeting, their weekly Monday night meeting at the Warren Occult Museum, School of Paranormalology, it was called back then in the late 80s, 1986. And I said to Lou, you have to get me in there. I said, it's time. And so he told Lorraine about myself when he went that Monday night, and she invited me to come with him the following Monday. And that's how I got involved. But what did we do right there in the car? What we did is we declared through the universal law of intention that we wanted to become paranormal investigators, and we used the law of conscious manifestation to I mean, it just manifested for us instantly, and that was absolutely incredible, the fact that it happened so quickly.
Within 24 hours, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I got to meet her the next Monday night, and it was just destiny, really. But she asked me two very pointed questions, and the first was, how strong is your faith, honey?
Yeah.
And I replied, I have a very strong faith. I said, I believe that we are intimately connected to God, and we can never be separate, and we're always protected from God, by God from within. And her second question was, why do you have any interest in getting involved in investigating these cases with us? And I told her because I read the book, and I was absolutely frightened for these poor families experiencing these things. Yeah. And she said, it's a calling then. And I said, yes, absolutely. And the rest is history, really. It was quite incredible.
Well, you had two great mentors there to learn from.
I think so. I mean, I call them, and I give them all the respect in the world, and I'm the first one to call them the pioneers of the modern ghost hunting movement, at least in the United States. But they were very popular in the United Kingdom as well. In fact, even more so, I believe. But, they started it all, and all these people that, are out there investigating really have them to thank because of all the information, especially the information that Ed brought forth, being a demonologist and, sharing his vast wealth of knowledge. And I actually really regret not being his apprentice, if you will. I mean, I learned so much from him, but actually learning everything that he knew, because he once told us, I've told us many times, he said, there are things about this world that are best left unsaid. And, taking things to your grave without them being public knowledge that could really benefit the rest of humanity, I think is a shame. But Lorraine is still carrying his work on, and, she's getting older, but she's doing her best to continue. And, I love her to death. She's just absolutely amazing and a beautiful soul and just kind and compassionate. And I'm just thrilled to be able to call them my mentors and then my friends as well, but also now colleagues. And it's just a great experience for me.
So you're an empath. Could you explain to the listeners what that is?
I wanted so badly to see a ghost when I was starting with the Warrens. And I had a profound experience on my very first case, which ironically we were sent on the very next night, just Lou and I, the paramedic. And we all saw in our third eye a bright blue flash of light that was not recorded on the videotape, but we all saw it clearly, both Lou and I and the man and woman that were owned the home. But that was, picking up something with our third eye and seeing it. But I wanted so badly to see a full apparition like Lorraine was seeing, and like our friend Andy Thompson was seeing. He's a very, very gifted psychic who was one of the original investigators with the Warrens, along with John Zaffis. But we were in a case in Vermont, and that was absolutely an amazing situation that occurred because we almost didn't even make it to Vermont because the demonic spirits in the house basically tried to disable the caravan that I was driving to pick everybody up and drive to Vermont. But while I was in this case in Vermont, it turns out that there was this woman who had lost her child. She was on her way to give birth. She was in a horse and carriage on her way to get to the house, to the midwife who was going to help her deliver the baby. And in their haste to get to the house, the carriage flipped and this woman's body was mangled.
Oh my God.
I never say anybody dies because nobody in the history of the earth has ever died. Their bodies have failed, but their spirits or their conscious awareness go on. But she went back to the house in incredible grief, searching for her baby. But when we made it to Vermont and we were searching around on the property, I was the last one in the group to head back to the house. And I actually turned around and I said, even though I couldn't see her, I could sense her. And I said, come back to the house with us.
Yeah. And
I made a connection with her, and I didn't even know it, because to her, I could see her. She didn't know that I couldn't see her. So I made a connection with her. So, which was very important about why this event that happened. So when we went back to the house and we were trying to communicate with the spirits in the house, and there were many, all of a sudden the table is rocking and shaking and banging on all four legs, and so many people were freaking out completely. But all of a sudden my jaw dropped and tears just flowed out of my eyes. And I said, Lorraine, the sadness. And I picked up this woman's grief that was so overwhelming that it caused me, a man, guys can hold in our tears if we really try. And it just totally overpowered me. And I really just cried my eyes out. And it happened 6 different times. And it was explained to me then that, of course, what I know now is that it's my gift or psychic ability that is most active is the empathic ability, where I'll pick up emotion, and then I started to pick up messages and names and the reasons why spirits weren't crossing over, and why, what they wanted to relay to their loved ones after they had passed out of their bodies. But that was my first really amazing, profound experience. And it happened on a farm up in Vermont. And I don't think I can mention the name of the place just for legal reasons, but I do want to write about that story in one of my new, future volumes.
And how would you help somebody cross over who hasn't crossed over yet for whatever reason?
I would deal with them. See, I hate the term ghost hunter, because we don't hunt humans. So why are we hunting ghosts? Yeah. And these people, which are these fields of conscious awareness that once animated the bodies that we knew and loved, and had the personalities that we knew and loved, completely survived the death of the body. No matter what happens to the body, I'm convinced that we maintain full conscious awareness, and we can see and think and hear and reason just like we could when we're in the body. And that for many reasons, people can eventually cope and come to cope and deal with that situation that they're disembodied, and then learn how to function in this disembodied state. But when that light opens up, that portal of light, or that vortex or stargate or wormhole or tunnel, however it's described, that when that light opens up, people become instantly afraid in many cases, because even though they can deal with being disembodied, they really don't know what's through that light. And for a lot of Christians, they could believe that could be judgment and damnation if they're found not worthy of going to heaven. So they're terrified to go through that light. And then a lot of other people don't want to go because they're afraid of facing loved ones that they didn't get along with, or have to deal with the circumstances of their life that they don't believe will be looked at favorably, or they have addictions to alcohol or drugs or sex or other people, or they have unfinished business. And in the many cases that I worked on, mostly that were brought to my attention, were cases of unfinished business. And I'll give you an example, which is in my book, in the analysis section of my book. Everything I've been talking about tonight really is in the analysis section of my book, which is the last 100 pages. But I received a letter from this family, and the man of the house died, he passed, and he would be seen inside the house every evening after the funeral, and it really started to frighten his widow and his children, who were quite young teenagers, and they really were concerned for him. So I went in, and I took my friend Valerie Crisp, who's out in Washington State. This is when I lived out in Washington State when I was getting my bachelor's in English creative writing. And I brought her with me, and we went into the house, and I just picked up or intuited he won't cross over until he is forgiven for something. He did something that he really feels badly about, and he wants to hear that everybody forgives him. And before he goes, so I said, let's have everybody sit in a circle, and it was his widow and the children and some of the other family members, and I invited him to sit in front of the person that was going to begin speaking. And I said he wants to start with. And I said, who is such and such? It was just a 3-letter name that I can't remember because this was 20 years ago. Yeah. But it was a name, and she said, well, that's what he called me. That's my nickname. And I said, well, that makes sense. He wants to start with you, his wife. So we asked him to sit in front of his wife, and for her to make peace with him and talk to him as if he were there, because he was there. And it was very heart-wrenching and emotional, because it went around the circle and talked to the children and the who were all crying and saying, I love you, Daddy, and I didn't get to say goodbye, and, you were a great father and everything. And everything was going beautifully until we got to one 14-year-old son who was absolutely livid, and he said, I'll never forgive you for what you've done to me. And so I looked at Valerie, and we looked at each other and gave each other a knowing glance and said that that's what it is. So we basically talked to him, and we said, whatever happened to you is obviously very personal and traumatic, but you have to understand, in order for your father to be at peace and for him to go and leave, you need to forgive him unconditionally, and you need to love him unconditionally. And of course, he was completely resistant in the beginning. He's like, no way. And about 20 minutes later, he really had a really deep, heartfelt cry, and told his father that he forgives him and that he loves him and he wants him to be happy and to go on. And Valerie looked at me and she said, he's ready to go. And she could see and hear. I pick up more emotions and more information. So we basically asked everybody to close their eyes and visualize a white light in the center of their bodies and know that that's their pure, unconditional love for this man, and to broadcast that white light into the center of the circle. And Valerie brought a huge crystal called Herbie. It's a huge quartz crystal, but she put it in the center, and we visualized our lights coming together at the crystal and then forming a pillar of light that shot up through the ceiling, and asked him to call out for his angels and to call out for Jesus, who's Christian, and call out for his parents who had passed before he had, and asked to be shown the way home. And then he went, and that was it. And that's the last the family had seen of him. But things like that, it's I deal with these people, disembodied spirits, in a very compassionate way, because we should treat them compassionately, just like we would treat any stranger that we met on the street or in inside anybody's home as their guest. They're not playthings, and they're not interested in giving you a photo shoot or playing games with you and so forth. In many cases, we're invading their homes when we go blindly into homes that are haunted without being invited by the current residents. But so I hate the term ghost hunter. I like the term ghost helper or spirit helper, and I find an incredible amount of satisfaction in helping these people cross over and come to terms with, understanding that there's absolutely nothing to fear and everything to gain by going through that light. And the reason is because when people leave their bodies and they don't cross over, they maintain the same personality, whether it's nasty or nice. And once they cross through and come back, their message is always unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness, and everything is beautiful and perfect. There's nothing to fear. And they look like they're 20 years old, no matter how old they were when they passed out of the bodies. But everything is just completely transformed and empowered when they come back. And to me, to send somebody through who might be in a state of fear and panic, and allow them to experience or help assist them through so that they can experience this reconnection or wholeness, to me, just fulfills me immensely.
So what you're talking about there is a human spirit. Now, last summer I interviewed Andrea Perrin regarding the whole Harrisville haunting story, which was the basis behind the Conjuring movie. I put this up on YouTube, and oh my god, the fights people get into in the comment section, because you have people saying there's no such thing as ghosts, that it's inhuman spirits that are there trying to fool you into thinking, that there's somebody else. And what would your theories be on the whole human spirit versus inhuman spirit? Could you explain that to us? Well,
we as human beings, or I say we are infinite immortal fields of conscious awareness, currently experiencing a physical life by animating the body, which I'd say is nothing more than a incredibly advanced electrochemical biological spacesuit, really, so that we can experience this third dimension for the purpose of going through the illusion that we're all separate from each other. When reality, we're all together, we're all connected, we're all part of individualized fragments of the totality of God or source. And that's all proven through quantum physics, string theory, that we're all connected and we're never not connected, and it's impossible not to be connected. But I believe that when we leave or shed our bodies, we actually become much more sensitive and much more powerful in the realm of affecting energy and experiencing telepathy and actually interacting with people. We're actually freed in many ways from a very limited spacesuit. And that's a strange term to use, but our eyes, as human beings, we're practically blind when it comes to what we can actually see in the spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum. And cats and dogs, for instance, can see in the infrared, they're now saying, so they're much more capable than we are, and we're blind as a bat, but we don't even have sonar like a bat does. So I think that when we leave the bodies, we can see so much more. Now, on the other hand, demonic or inhuman diabolical spirits, I believe in my mentor Ed Warren's teachings, in that these are beings of vast power that have never walked the earth in human form, and their primary goal is to ruin the lives of mankind for reasons that maybe we don't quite understand, but we assume to be because they're so upset because of their fall and their separation from God and whatever that whole story really is. Also, there are beings that are extraterrestrials. Now, are these extraterrestrials when they come and abduct people, like the Greys, for instance, when they come and the stories behind these ETs when they come and abduct people is often very similar to what the ancient tales about demonic encounters are like, with the incredible smell of sulfur, these beings that seem to come through your walls and scare you out of your mind and perform all these grotesque rituals or experiments on you and take you and treat you like you're just a lab animal, are very similar to modern. The similarity between old demonic stories and modern UFO stories are very similar. And I believe in many cases, specifically with the case of Ouija boards, for instance, I just had a discussion today I posted on my page, and I said the reason Ouija boards are so dangerous is because you're issuing a blanket invitation for any spirit here to come communicate with me. Are there any spirits here to communicate with me? Here, you're never even defining the word here or quantifying it. Well, where here? In this room? In this house? In this country? On this planet? In this dimension? In this galaxy? In heaven? In hell? There's nowhere. And given today's surveillance society or state, we know that there could be other parties taking a very active interest in the conversation taking place and wanting to come in and actually get involved. And I believe they need our permission to invade our world. Once we give them permission to invade our world, then all bets are off, and they'll do whatever they can to actively oppress anybody that they've targeted and try to get them to cast off as much fear energy as possible, which I call the fear buffet, because they just gobble that energy up and use for themselves against the family involved or the individual involved, even more so because you're fueling them. And to me, it's all about vibration, and it's all about frequency, and love is the highest frequency of them all, and fear and hatred are the lowest. And I think that by supplying them with ample amounts of fear, you're doing yourself an incredible disservice, but it's incredibly frightening to go and experience these attacks and so forth. But I say that the best defense against these demonic forces, I've never been attacked, Rita. And I've been at this for 28 years, and I've been in demonic homes. The second case I ever went on was a demonic case, second and third, actually. And I never have been attacked because I've always believed that I can't be attacked. That's a huge, huge...
do you do that whole grounding thing, like before you go into? I
don't ground, but what I do is I've always known that I'm connected to Source, that I'm an individuated fragment of the totality of Source. I'm a divine part of God. I'm one cell that is cast off or has divided from the God Source, right? And that I have this knowing that I can't be attacked because I was created and am protected by the ultimate power of the universe. So what I did was, Ed told me how to do the Christ light, for instance, where you imagine a glowing white sphere of energy in your core and you're expanding it to surround you into a brilliant white field of energy. And it's the same thing I always saw and felt as a boy, is that we have a golden field of energy the size of a golf ball, for instance, in our core, always. And I call it the God spark now, but we can never be without that. And I liken God to like the sun. And this has nothing to do with religion. I'm talking about from a spiritual perspective. If the creator of everything that we know, or the creator of the universe, casts a flare or a spark off from that brilliant, glowing, radiant sun, which is God, we all have that spark within us. And when a host cell divides, those cells that have been cast off become eventually just like the host. So I think we're all godlings in the making, and we don't realize it. And the very word human means God-man. Hu means God, man means man. And I think that we're all godlings in the making. We'll never, ever be able to become more powerful than God. And why would we even want to? But we have a lot of power within to protect ourselves with. So I imagine this golden golf ball sized field of golden energy in our core expanding into the size of a softball, and then expanding out in the size of a basketball, and then completely enveloping us in a sphere of impenetrable, brilliant golden light. And if we know and we believe that this is the ultimate power in the universe, it's the highest frequency in the universe, you've raised your vibration to levels that no negativity can ever breach, then you know you're protected at all times. And I've also never directly challenged or provoked any of these demonic spirits. I've known, I've taken objects out of my pockets to help protect myself with, which was the second case I was on, and this demonic form apparently came right up to me, right down the stairs and right up against me as I was on the couch, and Andy Thompson was there, and Donna Zor, and I think John Zaffis, but they said, "Jason, what did you do?" And I said, what? And they said, "He has rosary beads, put them away quick," So I'm, then I got a little spooked and was trying to stick them back in my pockets, but I never took them out as a direct challenge to this demonic form that we all knew was in the house. I just took them out for extra levels of protection. And I think always it's your intention. No matter what it is, it's always your intention that matters. And if I intended to challenge that spirit, then it could have taken me up on that challenge and tried to do something to me if it could have breached this field of high vibration love energy. So I think the most potent and powerful thing to do for people when they're feeling afraid, or they think there's a ghost in their house, or they think they're hearing whispers or whatever, is not to buy into the fear and shiver under their sheets and cover their head and hope there's no monsters under their bed, but to know and stand in their own power and grow this field around them, and just to be love, radiate love, and just feel like you're this lighthouse of love that's just blasting it all around you in all directions, and actually pushing away any negativity out of your room and your house. And that, through the law of attraction, by its very nature, pushes away any of these negative forces versus drawing them in and giving them energy by being in a fear state.
So if anybody out there now that's listening, if they'd messed about with a Ouija board, that would be your advice to them if they felt they were having like bad luck or bad energy attached to them?
My advice with the Ouija board is, and I asked Lorraine this exact question, I said, what should be done with the boards themselves? And she says, bury them. You bury them in the ground, and you declare that they are now, they will be buried, and their energy will be transmuted, and the doorway that was open will be closed, and so be it, and you can evoke Jesus or say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I release this board from my life, and I command any spirits associated with it to leave me be, in the name of Jesus Christ, But as far as the Ouija board is concerned, again, I think you're issuing a blanket statement to there are any spirits here who wish to communicate with me, but also I think it's even more dangerous than any other thing, because you're evoking or actually invoking these spirits, whether you know it or not, by issuing a blanket statement like that, to come inside you and use your hands to move the planchette. We all visualize a ghost on the other side of the table, reaching its spectral hands out and manipulating the planchette with you, right? But what if it's really coming through you and using your hands? And, when you joke around saying that you're just moving it or so forth, or somebody else is saying, oh, you moved it. No, you moved it. And everybody starts to laugh in the beginning. And I think everybody jokes around when they first time they use that. It's really maybe the spirits that are influencing what's going on. And Ed Warren always said that Ouija boards are old, maybe even timeless, and they're the single most dangerous piece of negative occult paraphernalia out there. And I strongly caution people never to use a Ouija board, because it doesn't just happen. Most of the times nothing happens, right? It doesn't need to happen right then. You're using your God-given free will to initiate communication with any spirits that are out there listening. And that doesn't mean human spirits. It could be any number of beings out there in the universe or the multiverse, or any dimensions or densities within those dimensions that we don't even have any knowledge of in our current level of understanding, and inviting them into our lives, and they can cause all kinds of horrific activity to happen. But Ed always says that 95%, at least 95% of all the cases that involve inhuman, demonic, diabolical spirits result from the direct use of a Ouija board. And the remainder come from seances, or that are practicing black magic, or actually cursing and actually using your God-given free will with the intention of summoning spirits. Now, if you have 3 kids, as in the case in my story Dark Siege, which is a real case that I investigated in 1993 in Connecticut, when they went and bought a Ouija board and planned on using it to try to communicate with this human spirit which was in the house, they didn't intend to open the doorway wide open and invite demonic spirits into the house, but that's unfortunately exactly what happened. And to them, it happened instantly, and that's how incredible this case was to me, and one of the reasons I wrote it, specifically because this is how dangerous these boards can be. So maybe nothing will happen to you if you've used it and count your blessings. Maybe it'll happen the next week. or the next month or 20 years from then. But what happens when that family moves out and a new family moves in who've literally never toyed with the negative occult or Ouija boards or anything of that nature, and can honestly say so to any investigators that go and investigate the house? But that's where the portal was open. And then all of a sudden, because of the energy involved in this new family coming into the house, things start to completely change, and that's when spirits come through.
In your book, Dark Siege, the family that's in it, have they ever come forward to talk about this publicly? Or
they were absolutely terrified to do so and wanted no recognition whatsoever, unlike other families, you know, like the Perrin family or the Smurl family portrayed in the movie The Haunting, who had huge reservations about coming forth to talk to the media because of the very scorn and ridicule. I mean, the Smurl case, I think, was back in the 70s, and that was absolutely, there was no paranormal investigation going on like it is today, and nor was it happening back in 1993 when my case happened. But they actually wanted no recognition whatsoever, and they were warned very clearly because of the incredible nature, the incredible speed with which this case went from a human spirit to full-fledged diabolical infestation, oppression, and possession within a week's time was completely out of the ordinary, and that's the reason I wrote it. But they wanted absolutely no recognition whatsoever, specifically because even thinking about it, you're drawing these things into your life. And I have to tell you, when I was writing the book 2 summers ago, trying to get it out right before Halloween because I needed to tell the world about the dangers of the occult, the negative occult, I was actually feeling pressures in my chest and feeling like, you know, I'm reliving these experiences even though they're 20 years later. And I was actually burning frankincense and myrrh and, you know, praying and making my space off limits to this negative energy. But you draw these things to you when you recollect. And that's the very last thing they wanted to do, is because once something goes public, it's out there forever. So because the activity didn't end like we anticipated it would, as the case came to a close at the end of Dark Siege, A Connecticut Family's Nightmare, that just proved the whole theory that things were going to keep creeping back in the more they gave it recognition. And they wanted to give it absolutely no recognition whatsoever. But I don't want to spoil the story for you if anybody reads it, but we actually had to do much more for the other people involved. Everybody who was involved in the case in the first book, Dark Siege, A Connecticut Family's Nightmare, who interfered in any way in the plans of the demonic spirits by helping the family or being there to witness or seeking to help them find help, whether it's in book format or in people that could come and intervene, suffered terrible retribution, demoniacal retribution. And the Vincent Decker, who was the demonologist involved, suffered terribly in the sequel.
Well, just, no, not ruining the story on anyone, but just one little thing I want to ask you about it. You always see the flies. What is it about flies when they're, do you know...
They want, these demonic forms know what sickens us or weakens us. You know, whether they're black disease-ridden flies or worms or the smells of excrement, you know, urine or feces or dead rotting flesh. It's anything that's designed to repel you and repulse you and weaken you and make you, you know, hack and cough and choke and squirm and radiate fear. You know, that's the only reason that they're projected. And a lot of these things are projections sent directly into your minds. And Ed always said, most hauntings start in the mind. And I'll break into a quick, the very first case I went on with Lou is apparently this woman would come through the wall every night in the bedroom, the parents' bedroom. They would see her full-fledged apparition, then walk down the hallway, stop in front of the baby at her crib, scare the baby out of its mind, and walk through the crib and disappear. So when Lou and I went and investigated, we aimed a camcorder, which is an old VHS camcorder, at the wall where she was seen coming out of every night, drew all the blinds, lit some candles, and we all waited patiently down the hallway in the baby's room, peering down the hallway, waiting for this apparition to walk down the hall. And instead of seeing an apparition, we saw this bright blue flash of light, like lightning went off in the room. We all just looked at each other with our jaws hanging slack and said, oh my God, you know. And then we went in there and we smelled a very overpowering almond smell, which was this perfume that she must have worn. And it happened again 30 minutes later. The smell half as intense and the bright flash of light was half intense. But when we checked the videotape, we saw no light at all, but heard my voice saying, we've just experienced the second flash of light. And so we saw nothing with our physical eyes, but it was broadcast to us very clearly, all four of us, into our pineal gland, which is a grain of rice-sized gland in the center of our brains that has always been known as the third eye, and which is photosensitive, scientists have discovered. So it was this light that was projected bypassing our physical eyeballs, but into our minds, in our pineal glands. But that's how a lot of these things start, is these illusions, because they were never there physically to be seen. And you have to take into consideration what our eyes really are capable of seeing and what they're really seeing. But these illusions that occur, like the flies in this case, the flies that I believe happened in the Amityville case were an illusion, and that's why so many people have so many problems with that, maybe being real or fantasized. But to these poor people that are experiencing it, it is the most dreadful, awful thing that you can experience. And you take into consideration UFO stories about how one person in a group will see a ship and everybody else standing there won't. Yeah. Or how all four of us saw this light projected into our minds, but nobody else did. Or how one family sitting in a living room will hear footsteps walking on the floorboards above them, and nobody else will. So everybody else in the family points their fingers at the person who heard them and, accuses them of being, dramatic or just causing trouble. Or they go, in old days, they would put you in an insane asylum because you're able to see these things that are being broadcast directly in your mind. So back to your demonic question, these demonic spirits, as in the case with Annabelle, which was the most famous case of what happens when you play around with a Ouija board, that was actually in the beginning of the movie The Conjuring. Really had nothing to do with The Conjuring, of course, but it just was a very interesting case about what really happens and how these spirits will manipulate you and twist things around so that you'll believe you're speaking to your grandfather, for instance, because he answers one of your questions or tells you what he gave you for your 5th birthday, and then you're instantly convinced, right? So what wouldn't you do for your dear old departed grandfather talking to you from the realms beyond? You'll do anything to help him. And then they trick you into giving them permission to do certain things, and then they have you because you're using your free will to invite them in. And they always need your permission. So these demonic spirits are crafty, and they're incredibly intelligent, and they do anything they can to interfere in a case where people are coming to offer their assistance. They'll try to frighten away the investigators. They'll try to, as in my case, when we were driving up to Vermont, cause a car to completely lose traction on the highway like they hit solid ice, in early November in Connecticut, which is just not possible, to slide into my lane so I'd smash into that car and hopefully it would wreck my car so I couldn't pick up the Warrens and the rest of the investigators to make it up to Vermont. Things like that, and all the demonologist is loaded with cases similar to that, but they go on and on about any way they can to try to weaken you and to break you down. They'll always go after the weakest member of the family unit first, whether it's the troublemaker or the kid getting into witchcraft or getting into drugs or alcohol or having mental problems or on any kind of pharmaceutical drugs now, which is very dangerous too, because you're breaking down your defensive energy field when you do drugs and alcohol and things like that.
The other thing I want to ask you is, every other week on Facebook there seems to be a new paranormal investigation team popping up. What kind of advice would you give to people who are starting out and who are genuinely interested in researching, this phenomenon?
God, I want to give one of my quotes from my book, but I'll refrain. But it's, there's a world apart from our own, bordering on twilight, that is unheard and unseen most of the time. But, people getting involved in this phenomena, like Lorraine Warren told me, she says, the more you're involved in our cases, the more your antenna are going to become tweaked and more sensitive, and you're going to be more sensitive to pick things up. And that's absolutely true. When you're dealing with, I could not believe the number of paranormal groups, and I still can't believe it, because I see more and more every day. When I was involved in investigating, I couldn't care less about gadgets or cameras or videotapes or all the tech that exists today, which frankly didn't exist in 1986. When I first started with the Warrens. But I decided that I'm my own instrument and I'm my own antenna. And how are physical objects like the camcorder that Lou and I had going to pick up activity, like the apparition that we all hoped would show up on the camera, when she had absolutely no interest whatsoever in providing that image on the camcorder, but instead projected things into our heads. So how are your physical instruments going to pick up something that's etheric and vibrating on a level that's never going to be perceptible to your gadget? People who have a genuine interest in investigating homes always have to ask themselves, well, what's the purpose? Why am I getting involved in this? And what am I going to do? The most important question to ask is, what am I going to do if I stumble upon something that is not human at all, but something that's inhuman and absolutely desires to completely destroy my life and destroy my family's life, and to, engage in a campaign of terror the likes I've never seen before or would ever even dream existed. Unfortunately, in fact, just last night, I do all these paranormal conventions, and I meet a lot of interesting people, a lot of other people and their teams and so forth, and they buy my book and they read it and so forth. But one person who did buy the book, his whole team bought a copy actually in San Antonio, just messaged me last night and says, one of our team members is really, really frightened. Something awful is happening, and I'd like you to talk to her. So I did on Facebook, and I won't mention who it is, of course, but I mentioned everything that I talked to you earlier about expanding the field of love, the energy around you, and knowing and believing you're protected, and then how to pray properly. What I would say to them is that you have to question your motives about why you really want to get involved. Is this something that you want to personally experience just so you know that it's real? And that's a valid reason. Mm-hmm. Is it to help people? That's a wonderful reason to help others. If you're in service to others versus service to self, but you have to have a plan in place for what you're going to do if you stumble on something that's demonic, because most people have and sadly, most investigators absolutely have no idea what the true levels of power are related to these demonic spirits and what they can and can't do. There's very little that they can't do unless you're protected. But for somebody like, as in the case in my book, the father, for instance, who was completely the last person to ever believe in ghosts, it's one thing to understand that these demonic spirits exist and understand the levels of activity that they manifest inside homes and what they do to attack people. It's one thing to understand that and then experience it and then go through that fear and terror, but you realize, oh, well, this is happening and I know this can happen. But it's another to be completely unaware of the existence of demonic spirits and then be totally taken off guard and attacked by them is enough to make some people just lose their minds completely and snap, and to do all the wrong things when it happens by provoking or challenging them by directly invoking verbally the protection of the angels or Christ or somebody, when they will react to that in an instant and try to cause immeasurable harm to you. It's a very dangerous world out there when you're not dealing with just human spirits like somebody like you or I who've left our bodies, because we maintain the same personalities, like I said. So chances of finding somebody who's a decent spirit who doesn't want to harm you, might want to scare you because it thinks it's funny, is one thing. But to have something that is ultimate, it's like facing a serial killer with unlimited power. Imagine that, who you can't see and wants to just wreck your life. And then if it can't wreck your life, then you just go wreck everybody you love because you love them. So I strongly encourage everybody to buy my book.
Nice little plug there.
to read my experiences. And I am blessed, like I said, to work with the Warrens, who started the whole paranormal craze, back in the 60s, when there was no paranormal groups around but them.
From listening to you throughout the interview now, and you don't like the term ghost hunting, and obviously you're very respectful towards spirits, so what would your feelings be on, haunted events? People go to old castles, going ghost hunting for the night. What would your opinion be on that?
I don't like it, because I'd want to go there and help all the spirits that are trapped in this location for one reason or another, to help them cross over. Mm-hmm. That's my purpose. And I think that I don't want to step on any toes or cause any hard feelings or anything like that for people, but when somebody's running an establishment like a haunted inn or a haunted whatever and charging money for people to come in and investigate rather than doing everything that they can to help these spirits cross over, I equate to not only human trafficking but soul trafficking, and I think it's wrong. I I have several friends who feel the same way I do, and we'd want to go in there, and whether the establishment owner knows it or not, we'd want to help these spirits cross over and end the haunting in the first place, so these poor beings can go on and find resolution to their life and start over.
Now, before I let you go, you have another book coming out. It's due out in September, I believe. Is that the sequel to Dark Siege?
Correct. Yeah. The original book is called Dark Siege, A Connecticut Family's Nightmare, and it's available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com in Kindle and Nook formats. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, it'd be Amazon.co.uk for the UK. Okay. For all the listeners there, which I'm thrilled to be able to reach during your show here. I really appreciate it. Oh, no and my website is darksiege.com, and the sequel is called Dark Siege, The Nightmare Returns. Everybody wanted to know what happened, and I really, because the book was already over 450 pages, and that was really the end of the first phase, I saved the sequel for the second edition, which is everything that's happened afterwards, 2 months later, and very, very full of interesting information. But what makes the book most interesting is, yes, it's recreated in novel format. So you're actually reading like a Stephen King novel, but I'm not comparing myself to the great Stephen King, but somebody else did actually in one of my reviews. But but the last 95 pages to 100 pages is the chapter-by-chapter analysis section, where I break down and contrast and compare all the activity in each one of my chapters to other very well-documented cases, either that were brought forward through the Warrens' efforts or through other means, but also explain my experiences and beliefs growing up, my beliefs and my experiences growing up, the synchronistic events that led me to meet Ed and Lorraine Warren, like I explained to you earlier in the beginning of the show. Yeah. And then the first cases that I went on with the Warrens, the first demonic case, the first empathic case that really changed my life, and then what I did afterwards. But also the science and spirituality behind the paranormal, through explaining it through quantum physics and string theory, for instance, and also through the universal laws of attraction and intent or intention and conscious manifestation. And cross-reference other books, one of which is Dr. Raymond Moody's work, Life After Life, which is an in-depth study about near-death experiencers and what really happens when we leave our bodies. So that helps the reader understand, oh, well, this is what happens when we leave our bodies, and this is what is going on in the situation from the ghost point of view. So I'm very pleased that I included it in the book itself. I was hesitant to include it in the book, but I was going to offer it as a separate book. But it's really very beautiful, profound spiritual messages in that section about how to really protect yourself and how to raise your vibration and raise your frequency, and how to use love to deflect the negative energies through the law of attraction, and how to pray correctly, which is very important. You pray from a statement of fact, not a statement of lack. Thank you, Jesus, for being here now and for defending me. Thank you, archangels, for drawing out your swords and for cutting away any attachments I have to these demonic spirits, and thank you for taking them out of my life forever, so be it, versus praying, oh, please come help me, please come help me. It's a very big difference. Anything you ask for in faith, you shall receive. Thank you for being here now. You already know it's already done because you have the right to ask for that assistance, and it's instantly manifested into your reality. And that's immensely powerful when you're dealing with something that is making you afraid. So really, for somebody to buy Dark Siege, not only are you getting a great story, but it's also a tool for people who would want to get into paranormal investigation. I'd say they'd learn a lot from it. Right. Well, Jason, that has been fantastic having you on the show. It's been so interesting. And should we get you back on again when the next book comes out in September? Sure. And I'm just really happy to be able to connect with all the new friends in Ireland I hope I make. Thank you so much, Jason. We'll talk soon. Thank you.